lot of people will use, when they talk about business aviation or private aviation or private jets, they think it's a luxury experience. But I'll tell you that the vast majority of people that I know and that I help use aviation. They're using it to get more time back with their business, more time back with their family. And it's really the one thing that all of us universally on this planet have the same struggle on, is the amount of time we have. I think other than a magic carpet, the next best way of getting your time back when you travel is by traveling using private aviation. And so a lot of times people will say, well, flying privately is so expensive. When you start looking at taking your team members out of the office for 3 days and putting them in hotel rooms and all of that, it's surprisingly a different calculation of what the costs are. I always kind of equate it to you're going on a bus. If you're on an airline or you're on a bus and you're in a nice little quiet limousine, like a Rolls Royce goes when you're traveling privately. I can't tell you how many times I've been on an airliner and I've heard people talking, and maybe there's a team, even just 2 people in the same company flying, sitting behind me, sitting next to me, whatever. And I hear all of their personal business conversation going on. And I don't think people realize, you don't know who else is on that airplane.
No.
You really don't. Hi, Alex.
Denise,
Hello.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We discussed doing a episode on I'm prospective client of yours, or I'm a business owner that's interested in how does private aviation open up doors for me. You first of all, you've listed a number of topics. I'd like, if you could, to tell me what those are: safety, time, etc. And let's just dive into each one of them and go into the details, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, I think other than a magic carpet, the next best way of getting your time back when you travel is by traveling using private aviation. General aviation, business aviation, kind of the same bucket there. The security, the safety, the time factor. A lot of people will use, when they talk about business aviation or private aviation or private jets, they think it's a luxury experience. But I'll tell you that the vast majority of people that I know and that I help use aviation. They're using it to get more time back with their business, more time back with their family. And it's really the one thing that all of us universally on this planet have the same struggle on, is the amount of time we have.
Certainly.
Right? So, but above all, time savings is the biggest thing.
Not showing off luxury, etc. That is not what it is.
No, that's what the influencers do. That's not what...
That's not the reality.
That's not the reality of our industry at all. The reality of our industry is there's a lot of humanitarianism that goes on. So I can't tell you how many times there's been a natural disaster like Haiti. I remember how many of my friends took their planes back and forth multiple times, delivering supplies down there and then bringing people back into the United States. I had a client that used to regularly fly lumber down to Ensenada because he was building an orphanage down there.
Wow.
I remember a time, another client, he had a PC-12 that could land in dirt, on unimproved surfaces, and he was flying water and cans of tuna down to this little town on the Baja Peninsula in Mexico, that the roads had gotten washed out during a big rain event. So he was just flying in.
Wow.
Delivering supplies, hundreds of stories about how people use their private aircraft to help others. Anyway, I could talk about that piece all day.
I love that.
But, being able to drive right up to the airplane, get on the airplane, and fly directly to where your business or whatever wherever you're going, flying directly there.
That speaks very much to me because, again, me playing the role here of the prospective buyer, like I have no time. I have 2 small children. I have a business. Every hour counts for me.
Yeah.
And I love that from the time savings. If you could speak to, again, someone that doesn't really understand or know it, talk to me about the time savings.
So airlines typically are flying in and out of their hubs. So if we're here today in Henderson, okay, if you wanted to fly, let's say, to Des Moines, let's say you had a customer in Des Moines, you would need to first get a car or get your car, drive to, McCarran, I guess it's Harry Reid Airport now, sorry. Fly to fly there, fly to an airport that has a hub, and then transfer and get on another airplane to get to Des Moines. Whereas in this situation, with you being based right here in Henderson, you have this great general aviation airport right here in Henderson.
Yep.
You can basically get on an airplane there in Henderson and fly to Des Moines nonstop, not having to change planes and do all of this.
Not to mention the 2 hours before and the security and the
Getting there
hassle.
early and all of that. And also when flying privately, you can find, I think there's something like 500 airports that the airlines use across the United States, but we actually have like 3,000
Wow.
airports. So rather than having to fly into a hub, you just find a smaller airport that's closest to where you actually are trying to go,
Yep.
and you fly directly into that airport. It's a huge time saver.
Huge time saver. Yep. This might sound funny, but on the subject of time, I have to fly to Chicago in a few weeks, and it's important for me to be least time possible away from my children. That's the very, very high on my list, and I can't get a flight back at a time of which I want.
Yeah.
I just really wanted to arrive, and I wanted to tuck in my daughter to bed. That's important to me. Just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Unfortunate. It's either too early, too late. Don't have a choice.
Well, and that's one of the big selling points about private aviation. When I had my charter company, we would routinely fly this group of farmers, yes, farmers, from Palm Springs up to the Central Valley of California.
Mm-hmm.
There was no way to get there via the airlines. I mean, what you would have to do literally is fly Palm Springs to LAX, change planes, and then you'd fly it up to like Bakersfield, or you'd fly to Fresno and then drive, someplace in between to get to this airport, to where this group of farmers had all this farmland. So that, before they started chartering a little modest, Citation jet, they were taking a whole day to get up there, spending the night, working the next day, and then on day 3, come home. When they started chartering with us, it was a 1-hour flight there.
Yeah.
They worked all day, and they were all home in time for dinner.
Wow.
And so a lot of times people will say, well, flying privately is so expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start looking at taking your team members out of the office for 3 days and putting them in hotel rooms and all of that, it's surprisingly a different calculation of what the costs are.
Yes.
Because I think at the time, like, their charter flight was round trip, I think it was like $8,000, and it was a group of 7 people.
Mm-hmm. 7 hotel rooms, couple of days. Yeah, it's
3 days away from home, and as far as the costs go, that's a whole nother, I guess, conversation we can get into, because there's lots of different ways you can use private aviation. You can charter an airplane. You can have a fractional ownership where you own just a small piece of an airplane, or you can do whole aircraft ownership. And typically what we're seeing with our clients who own airplanes are one of 2 different profiles. One, they're an owner-operator, someone who's been working their, to grow their business, but they also happen to be a pilot,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of us that have our own businesses that are also pilots, there's this dream of one day being able to combine those 2 loves into one. And so rather than chartering an airplane where someone else is up there in the cockpit, hey, maybe I can continue my flight lessons and my type ratings and this journey of aviation, learn to fly jets, and then I can have the freedom to fly the company jet myself.
Love it. Yeah.
There's a lot of that. And then there's the companies that just use the airplane for a tool, and they hire a flight department.
Yep.
They hire their own pilots to fly the aircraft for them.
That's the owner without the love of aviation himself or herself.
Yeah, the love of aviation really comes in, what can this tool do for my business?
Mm-hmm.
And that's it.
Yeah. So could you speak to the money? In this, there's a tax benefit. There's benefits to the write-offs of the purchase or the
Yes.
charter. Like, can you give a layman like me an overview of how that's attractive to certain owners?
Yes. Well, since the One Big Beautiful Bill came into legislation in July of 2025, our industry's had the ability to benefit from bonus depreciation. So basically, if you have a profitable year in your business, a lot of owners like us, I mean, I just went through this last week where I'm looking at this potentially huge tax bill thinking, what can I do here to reduce this tax liability?
Yeah.
But for companies that have, millions of dollars of profit and they're looking for a way to expand their business and also, pay less to Uncle Sam, but put that money someplace else. Putting money into an asset for the business that's going to help the business grow is a lot of times a smart move.
Yep.
So for some companies, that might mean buying a huge piece of machinery. For other businesses that have multiple locations across the U.S. where you're struggling with that exact same time constraint thing that I mentioned with the farmers, looking at owning a private aircraft can be a great solution. So a lot of times we'll see our customers that are buying something between, a $2 to $5 million jet, and they can take that, basically depreciate that entire amount in the first year of ownership.
Wow.
Which is huge.
Yeah.
And the requirements are basically that you're going to use the airplane for business and that you put the aircraft into service by December 31st, which means doing a business flight by the last day of the year.
Wow. Highly attractive.
Highly attractive.
And as you said, it's if that is, let's say, not currently possible for that owner, there's other options. There's the fractional, there's the chartering, there's all these other things that could be very attractive for the point at which they're at.
Yes. So there's co-ownership, which I didn't touch on either. It's a version of fractional. So in our industry, when we say fractional, we're usually talking about a company like NetJets or FlexJet who's managing the program, meaning they're selling the shares to all the individual owners. They're providing the pilots. It's really a turnkey service where you buy a fractional share and you get the benefits of the bonus depreciation on the amount that you
did, yeah.
That you did, but then you have someone else just managing everything for you.
Yeah. And it's correct me if I'm wrong, but the schedule's based on their schedules, not yours, and there's some negative to the freedom. Is that right?
There's some pretty good freedom.
Yeah.
I mean, there's usually some blackout days where they might say, hey, we need 4 hours or 8 hours notice instead of our usual couple of hours notice to have the plane to you.
Wow.
But honestly, there's not a lot of people in the business world who say, I need to go in 2 hours someplace.
Yep.
The reality is, I mean, there are times, if you're in a particular type of business where that's an issue, like I used to have a client that it was in the automobile manufacturing industry. And if their assembly line went down, they needed to dispatch, like they had multiple places across the U.S. with assembly lines. But they only had one crew to fix the assembly line. So if an assembly line fixed, in the Southeast went down, they'd have to fly somebody from Detroit, the team to go fix the assembly line.
Immediately.
Yes. They had their own fleet of jets.
Yes.
That made sense for them.
Yep.
But for a vast majority of business owners, needing to dispatch someplace in 2 hours is just not time critical.
Yep.
Right? A lot of times we know, okay, like I need to go tomorrow or I need to go next week to visit with someone, to meet a client, to go look at whatever location or other store. So having the fractional ownership, you can schedule with the fractional company, basically say, hey, look, next Tuesday I need to go XYZ time, and they will make it happen.
Yeah.
The only time where there's any issues, I think, is depending on what level of fractional ownership you have, or even with jet cards sometimes, is if you're wanting to go on the same day that everybody else wants to go, the day after Christmas, or, then maybe there's a little bit of flexibility that's required.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
What about safety? You mentioned safety.
Yes.
Could you speak to that piece?
Yes. So the Department of Transportation, I haven't looked at these numbers in a long time, puts out data, but I can tell you this with 100% assurity here that flying in a private jet is hundreds of times safer than driving in a car.
Mm-hmm.
So here's what I know about pilots, having been one myself and having managed pilots, over the last 25 years, is that pilots go through an enormous amount of training, background checks, drug testing. I mean, every 6 months, if you're a captain on a private jet, you're going to simulator training every 6 months,
Wow.
and you're being tested on everything, emergencies, normals, all of that. As opposed to someone who has a driver's license for a car, you don't know if they're sober, you don't know. And they're driving, what,
Yes.
2 feet away from you going
Correct.
70 miles an hour?
Yes, so true.
When you're flying on a private jet, you're like 3 miles away from
Yeah.
a next nearest jet.
And you can see everything usually.
Yeah,
right? If it's
yeah,
not
and-
IFR, I guess. Yeah.
And plus the amount of technology we have in private
Yeah.
jets, it tells you where other airplanes are, where terrain is, and all of that. It's a very, very safe way to fly.
On that point, I had a 2005 Cirrus SR20 once. And I remember being told at that time that the Aviation system that was in that thing 20 years ago was better than most regional jets at the time it had.
That is true.
Is that true?
It is true.
That's
Yes,
so
that is
interesting.
true.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the technology in the planes is extreme.
Technology
Yeah.
changes in private aircraft faster than it changes in airliners.
Wow. Cost may be associated with an overhaul of
Well, you're
yeah.
updating an entire fleet, and just how long everything takes from FAA approval and implementation, the sales process, and manufacturing.
Yeah. So from a safety perspective, certainly.
Yes.
Certainly.
Yes.
Very interesting. Is there any other major category of which we haven't touched?
Corporate espionage.
Ah, yes.
I love that one.
Okay.
I love that one because I've witnessed it myself on numerous occasions.
Wow.
You know, I can't tell you how many times I've been on an airliner and I've heard people talking. And maybe there's a team, even just 2 people in the same company flying, sitting behind me, sitting next to me, whatever. And I hear all of their personal business conversation going on. And I don't think people realize, I mean, you don't know who else is on that airplane.
No.
You know, you really don't. If you're flying on a private jet, you can talk, you can have a full-on confidential meeting and no one knows what you're talking about. Not to mention you can keep in touch with your teams on the ground because most private jets have, you know, Starlink or other types of Wi-Fi systems, have sat phones, you know, so you're always in touch if you need to be. But I would also say just knowing where people are flying. Now, with private aviation, some operators get this right and some don't. There are some operators who don't hide where they're going. And so everywhere that you go is kind of on display.
Okay.
But there are ways in private aviation to hide where you're flying so that if you are going to be doing an IPO or some other, you know, so that the whole world doesn't know where you're going.
It's very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
And then you'd mentioned FlightAware, like people can, is that's the same thing,
Yeah.
correct? Yeah.
But there are ways to there are ways to mask where you're flying, even with FlightAware.
I see.
So there's a way to block the tail number, to use commercially available call signs, to operate the aircraft under a third party. There's
see.
ways to do that.
There's that whole layer that no one ever would think of, right?
Yes.
Unless they were in it. Unless
Yes.
they were in it. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
It's any other point that you think is valuable to make sure we haven't missed?
Let's see. So we've talked about the time savings.
Yeah.
We've touched on the convenience a little bit, but maybe not to the extent. So you mentioned that you have kids.
Yes.
Yes, so traveling with kids. Personally, I think traveling with kids on a private jet is much more convenient
Oh.
than trying to go and fit into the airline scheme of how they want you to be. Like how old are your kids?
10 months and 3 years.
Okay, so if your kids are screaming on a private jet, nobody cares.
Yeah. I
But
have a little story for you.
yes,
We took our daughter when she was 6 months old or 9 months old. We flew to San Diego. We said, we can survive this. This is a sub 1 hour flight. We'll do it instead of driving. Yeah. And again, it's, we rented a car. We tried to return it. They were completely packed. There was nowhere to park. We drove for half an hour trying to find a space. When we got into the airport, it was a madhouse. I'd never seen anything like that. I swear to you, we were
nervous and tense.
We just had ourselves. We had her in the carrier, the wife, the bags, and everything, and there was nowhere to sit in the entire terminal. It was packed. Nowhere to sit. We stood around, and the flight was delayed. So of course, the nap time problem. This might sound like little problems, but for parents, it's not little problems.
Yeah.
And I just remember sitting there and thinking, this is just this is a madhouse. I can't believe that there's like this is even possible here. So that is real,
It is.
as opposed to going anytime you want, and
So
significant.
So an example, let's say that we were flying out of Scottsdale. Let's just say even you're just chartering a flight. You'd pull up to the gate of the FBO, dial into the team inside through the gate call box, and they buzz you in, and you fly and you drive right up to the plane. And as you're approaching the plane, there's ground personnel that work for the FBO as well as the flight crew, kind of directing you to where to park. So you park right next to the airplane. And then you take your time. So you have line personnel that's helping you put the luggage in the plane, and the flight crew's helping you put the luggage in the airplane. You have a kid in one hand and an arm and another kid. You have the people at the FBO and the flight crew, they're helping you. They're helping you get on the airplane. You're leaving on your schedule.
Love it.
You're leaving on yours. Somebody says, I need to go inside and go to the bathroom. Okay, let's go inside and we'll go to the bathroom. I want to go inside and get some popcorn in the lobby. Okay, let's go inside and have some popcorn.
Yeah.
Everything is just like notched down in terms of the franticness, and the service really comes to the forefront.
Yeah, I'm sure 50-fold.
And there's a lot of nuance too that people don't think about, and that is like turbulence. So a lot of times when you're flying on an airline, and I can say this because I used to be an airline captain myself as well. Dispatch will tell you what altitude they want you to fly at for fuel conservation, optimized routing, usually to save money.
Mm-hmm.
So you might find yourself at an altitude initially where there's a bunch of turbulence. Now, there's a lot of really good-hearted airline pilots out there that will do everything they can to find an altitude where there's no turbulence. There's also a lot of, they won't. They'll just fly at what they were told to fly at, and they're just on autopilot. That's what they'll fly at. The private jet, a lot of the jets that we have are, 45,000 foot service ceiling, 51,000 foot service ceilings. And so they're not playing in the same altitudes, the high 30s where the airliners are. So there's less turbulence up high. And because there's less traffic up there, there's a lot more flexibility to be able to ask for a different altitude to make sure that you're getting a smoother ride. So there's always all these little micro decisions that are being made by a corporate flight crew to, how can we make this a more comfortable flight? So they're thinking about the temperature in the cabin, right? They're making sure that they're coming back and asking you, how's the temperature back here? Are you comfortable? Can I get you something to drink? What can we do to make this a great experience for you? So obviously you're not getting that same level of service with an airline. So the airlines, I always kind of equate it to you're going on a bus. If you're on an airliner, you're on a bus, and you're in a nice little quiet limousine, like a Rolls Royce Ghost.
Sure.
When you're traveling privately.
Perfect analogy. Love it. Yeah. Wow. No, you've articulated beautifully all of the various, opportunities, et cetera.
Yeah.
Someone listening to this wants to work with you. What do they do?
It's easy. Go to our website and schedule a call with me. So we offer free strategy calls where we'll just talk through whether or not using business aviation works for your situation. Because let's be honest, it's expensive. There's not just the acquisition price of the airplane, but then you're looking at the ongoing operating costs, which can be, anywhere from, let's say $400,000, $500,000 a year for a smaller jet to $2 to $3 million a year if you're buying something, Gulfstream or Challenger, label in front of it, a super mid-heavy. We will talk through all of that, really understand what the person's business is. So I'd say set up a call with us and we can talk through it with you and see if you're a candidate for private jet ownership. And, even if you're not today, it's good to know, right, what the options are. I have a lot of clients that come to me that say, hey, I'm ready now. This has been a bucket list for me for 10 years.
Yeah, you told me that. I love that.
I'm finally in a place with my business where I can do this. Because a lot of times I'll help someone get set up with a partnership. Maybe whole ownership at the beginning is too much. But if you go in with a partner, typically we want to see like 400 hours a year. It's a really big rule of thumb, but
interesting.
400 hours a year
of actual use
makes financial sense more than maybe 100 hours a year.
Okay.
So, it's hard for most businesses that get into business aviation right from the very beginning to jump into 400 hours of usage a year.
Correct me if I'm wrong, it's 10 hours a week approximately? 10 hours a week? You're doing
That's
a flight.
a lot.
It's a lot. That's what I was saying. You're doing a couple flights a week,
Yeah,
right?
but if you have some businesses in your community
Yeah.
where you have similar kind of travel needs, a lot of times it can make sense to do a partnership,
Yeah.
or you buy the airplane if you need all of the tax write-off, but then you dry lease 100 hours a year to this company, maybe 100 hours a year to this company.
Interesting.
So there's ways to utilize the airplane above what you just might see on the surface.
I love it. I love it. Wow. Wow. Very interesting.
Yeah.
And knowing where you need to be in order for it to make sense is very valuable, right?
Yes,
Maybe
yes.
you do a full piece of content on that one day alone. It could be
Yes.
very valuable.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love that. I
Yeah.
love that. Wow.
Yeah, you really want to make sure that it's a right fit for you. There's a lot of brokers out there that will just sell you an
Of
airplane
course.
and take no consideration at all into your business, what it's going to cost. And then I've seen this time and time again. Then buyers surprised, shock sets in because of the operating costs, and then they sell the airplane.
Wow.
And they never come back to business aviation again. And that's a shame. It doesn't have to be that way. There's a lot of us in this industry that do focus on education and making sure that people understand what you can and can't do in terms of the tax benefits
Yeah.
and what the operating costs are going to be. But I'll tell you, anyone that's gone through this process that can benefit from it and understands what the financial commitment is, I've never had anyone say to me, yeah, it just didn't work. It just didn't work for our company.
Hmm.
It's constantly, it's like, well, yeah, we expanded. I had a client 2 months ago in November, I sold him an airplane, and he's moving up from a smaller jet, and his company had just gone from, I think they had 6 or 7 locations in the Southeast and just gone to 17 locations. And he said to me, well, where we're based, this little tiny town in the middle of Arkansas, we could not do this. We could not do this with 17 locations unless we had a private jet.
Yeah.
You just can't do it. You're gonna have your team drive an hour and a half to the local airport, and then it's just you can't run 17 locations
No.
that way. So
Fascinating. I love it. Thank you for the explanation.
thanks, Alex.
Thejetagent.com.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
thank you.